What do you think when you hear Burlington? It better be more than coats. How about outrageously low prices on amazingly big brands? Burlington has styles, decor, beauty, accessories, and so much more. We are not your mother's coat factory, but we are your deal destination. Come be surprised by the savings, the styles, and the selection. If you're thinking of your new favorite store, then you're thinking of Burlington. Head to your Burlington today. Burlington, love the deals.
A painfully historic defeat. Liverpool 7, Manchester United 0. I still don't quite believe it. In all honesty, I'm surprised you've braved this. There are bad days at the office, and then there is your joint heaviest ever defeat, matching defeats in 1931. What a uniquely terrible match and moment in this otherwise, at times, brilliant season. And nevertheless, a very warm welcome to the Manchester United Weekly Podcast. Let's get it all off our chest, shall we? And then move on as United look at setting ourselves up for Europa League progression, having already won the League Cup, of course, and reached the FA Cup quarter-finals where we've drawn Fulham. We know it was bad, that much is clear, but I think today we're going to be considering exactly what happened because don't get it wrong, this wasn't like the 4-0 at Brentford or even the 6-3 at City, and it certainly wasn't like last season's harrowing defeats to Liverpool home and away, even if the scoreline was incredibly even worse. And so it does feel different. So we'll be thinking, what is different about it, and why do we get the sense that this wasn't just bad, but utterly bizarre? So that's what we're trying to answer. And then we'll give you your regular extensive updates on the academy, players out on loan, and Manchester United women, who had a highly contrasting weekend with a thumping win to extend their lead at the top of the Women's Super League. And then we'll preview Thursday night's match against Real Betis of Seville and La Liga. Jack, that was really bad. That much is clear. We're going to use the guiding hand of our lovely patrons to help us through this difficult episode, and Anthony Gert starts us off nicely with his question, which would normally be part of the patron bonus Q&A, which we'll still have in this show, but we're using Anthony's question to start off with, and it's nice and simple, and all his question is how? In a very short answer, do you put this defeat down to tactical, physical, or mental reasons, or something else entirely?
I think United lost this game, and I say only lost it for now, and that distinction will become important.
Okay.
I think we lost this game because the way we set up tactically and the way we executed those tactics were quite poor. And I think you could see that in the first 50 minutes of the game. I think we were second best even then. And that is what led to probably us being probably up to 3-0 down, if you want to kind of split the game up like that. I then think a loss turned into a hammering because mentally we quit. And I mean that both really disparagingly badly against the players and a little bit understandably, because Anfield is an incredibly hard place to go and play football, especially when you're already on the downswing in a game when you fall behind. But the last 20 minutes of that game were truly horrific. I think 4-0 you can probably survive and you write it off as a traumatic Anfield experience. The fact that we then let the game go to 7, I think that is completely down to our heads just completely going.
Yeah, I think the turning point, I know what you mean about the second goal, but I think the proper turning point to take it into that mental bit was the third goal, because immediately after the second, this team was so focused, and they have all that belief from the last few weeks of being able to come from behind, so focused on getting back into it. And then the third goes in, and this, because of what's happened in the last few months and the belief so high, they still go to look for a comeback at 3-0 down, and it just went completely. And for me, on the mental side of things, it felt like all that pressure of the last few weeks. I talk about the brilliant stuff, but also the pressure where United have done it at Wembley, come from behind twice against Barcelona over 2 legs, come from behind against West Ham, even in the Cup the other night, which was ultimately comfortable in the end, but come from behind, holding on against Crystal Palace after that Casemiro red card, under a lot of pressure, coming from behind against Leeds to draw. All that pressure United have done brilliantly against and coped brilliantly with. And then when it began to crumble, and I think with the third goal very specifically, it didn't just begin to crumble, it fell down like a house of cards completely. This to me felt like mental fatigue. And I think if we go back to where we spoke at the very start of the season about what we expected from Ten Hag, and we spoke about how we thought we'd be able to see signs of his identity coming through, but that because of that and because of the way we play out from the back and how we press, we'd have some chastening defeats or heavy defeats or whatever. And we saw that in the first 2 games and the City game, but they've probably been a little less common, would you agree, than we initially thought at the start of the season. Is that right?
Yeah, I think we were expecting them to come more often, and they obviously haven't, which is a credit to the way that we have improved defensively, especially with Varane and Martinez and Casemiro in there. But at the same time, I do think that, we might not have had these...
And then this felt like, sorry, to carry on the point from before, this felt like we thought... First of all, we thought we'd have more of these heavy defeats under Ten Hag as he put his identity in. And then I think we thought the physical impact of these games would kind of show itself over a couple of bad defeats to so-called smaller teams. But instead, it wasn't the physical impact, it was the mental impact of all these games in quick succession, 21 games in 75 days, that made just a full-on collapse. And that's not forgivable, but it is explainable, I think.
It was a bit of a perfect storm, to be quite honest, at Anfield. Probably with the exception of Liverpool not scoring an early goal, which was probably the only way that mentally this could have been tougher. If you listen to any former Manchester United player speak about the toughest place to play, every single one of them without fail says Anfield. Says that Anfield, especially if you go behind, it is a horrible place to play football. And I don't think many grounds, even at some of our other biggest rivals like Ellen Road or the Etihad or the Emirates or Stamford Bridge, I don't think any of them have that. And so then when you couple that with conceding just before half-time, then just after half-time, then a few minutes after you concede that second goal, when you're trying to chase the game, you concede again, that is a body blow. And that is a set of circumstances that I think definitely created one of the hardest mental situations a player is ever going to face. Now, that is not to say for 1 second that the response that we had to that is acceptable. It wasn't. It was a disgrace, the way that we responded to that, because you go 3-0 down, fine. A, you try and get back in the game, but B, you maintain some professional pride. I mean, maintain some pride in your work, maintain some pride in the badge that you're representing on your chest. Don't pack it in the way that we did. I mean, that the last at 4-0, I was obviously frustrated, but I was almost like, you know what, it's Anfield, write it off as a bad defeat, escape at 4-0, and we'll move on. It was actually that last 20 minutes that to me was so bad in the way that we went about that. And we turned that from a really bad loss into a fucking embarrassing loss. And that to me is the part then I'm so frustrated at. I think on the general trend you're talking about and these heavy defeats, I think the one criticism you can level at Ten Hag for this last 8 months or so is that in away from home in big games against the 3 best teams that we've played away from home, in Arsenal, Man City and Liverpool, we've now shipped 6 goals to Man City, 3 goals to Arsenal and 7 goals to Liverpool. And that has to be a concern. It has to be a concern in that, we've managed to win these games at home, or at least do well in them, beating all 3 of those teams at home. But the manner in which we've been defeated away, that is a concern and something that I think is probably the only repeatable mistake that we've seen under Ten Hag.
I agree, yeah. Performances in the big away games have been really poor. Well, Arsenal less so, wasn't it?
We were in that game for long stretches.
I don't think it was a good performance. There were lots of bits that were bad, but it wasn't really poor. But yeah, City and Anfield, absolutely. And he'll have to take some serious lessons from him. Let's come on to how he set United up, because I think I agree. It's kind of semantics in terms of 4-0, 7-0. Not semantics, it's entirely hypothetical. But I think you're right. You come away from that game 4-0, and I agree with what you said. You move on. It's a bad day at the office. The problem is, there's a strange balance here, isn't it? Because I was listening to Gary Neville on Sky, and he was saying some rubbish things and some good things, but I think overall he was right. It was obvious that him and even Roy Keane were not getting too annoyed, and you also look at the reaction in the media from the United press pack, and the coverage is so kind. This isn't a criticism, and it's also going to be kind from me. The coverage is so kind because of the credit built up over the last few weeks. But I also think it's something to do with how the game was played. And at the end, I don't know if you would have seen, but viewers in the UK who weren't at the game would have seen, or if they hadn't turned off by that point, an argument between Gary Neville and Graham Souness and Jamie Carragher about, was this a 7-0 game? And it's that weird thing where Liverpool had even more chances to score and didn't, but they only had 8 shots on target and they scored 7 goals. And if you want to look at the XG, it's depending on which person's statistical model you use, it's around just under 3 or just over 3. It was, I think it has to be said, it was completely bizarre. And was the Salah, that amazing Salah finish on the turn, we didn't even look at the goal and hit the underside of the crossbar, was that the 4th goal?
Yeah, that was the 4th goal.
Right. At that point, it was obvious what was going to happen. And it wasn't, it's just, you speak about this with fine margins, and I think part of getting old as a football fan is realising, or older, is that fine margins. It's just ridiculous how an elite sport is decided on these tiny little things. But it's also ridiculous how big a factor momentum and confidence is on this, not just on so many scales over the course of a season, but also over of kind of a 2-minute, 3-minute scale within a 90-minute game. It's incredible. And at that moment, the 4th goal, where, because the second and third had been, the first, second and third all had really bad defensive mistakes. The 4th did have a mistake. I think that's the one where Anthony gives it away and Liverpool counter-attack. He gives it away on the edge of the box, stupidly, and Ten Hag had a big go. But the way that ball fell to Salah and the fact it came off the underside of the bar and the finish was so good, that's when I thought, right, this isn't going to end 4-0. This is going to end 6 or 7. Because it just felt like everything was falling to them and nothing was falling United's way. And it had that sense for about 10 minutes before as well, when United went up the other end and Alisson had I think that was in the second half, where Alisson had a nervous moment and instead Bruno tried to go through, but instead of the ball falling to a United player, it fell to a Liverpool player. There were a couple of other chances like that. And you just thought, that's why I think it's such a bizarre game, not just a terrible one. I don't think we'll ever see a Premier League team score 7 goals from 8 shots on target ever again. And I'm certain it hasn't happened before.
It's such an odd thing because it's uncomfortable after a 7-0 win to say we had some bad luck. And I get that.
And that's what, I don't know if you've seen, but that's what Souness and Carragher were getting.
Was so low.
They couldn't see Neville's actual point, which was not that United were unlucky. It's that Liverpool were great, but the combination of United giving up and those kind of fortunate deflections, not deflections to go in, but where the ball was landing, that's what his point was. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I think the performances of the two teams was probably more like a 3 or 4-0, which is still really bad. I don't mean to say that United were great. I do get why Souness and Carragher reacted like that. I do, because it is an uncomfortable thing to say, right. We've just been smashed by 7 goals, but we were unlucky. And so I do understand that. But if you look at the goals, right, the 4th goal in particular, McTominay actually does really, really well tracking back after Anthony loses the ball on the edge of the box. He tracks back brilliantly, makes a really good sliding interception. That ball then ricochets twice and ends up at the feet of Salah, who puts it in off the underside of the bar, like you said, without looking at the goal. The chances of that happening are extremely low, right? Then you look at the other one where Shaw, I don't even know what goal this is, but when Shaw ambles up to the ball, which was, by the way, so bad, but then he tries to clear it, takes 2 deflections, ends up right at Salah's feet, and he puts it in the net. Then you have, what goal was Darwin's goal? The one from the cross after a corner. Was that the 5th or the 6th? I think it was the 5th, right? Then you've got, what was it? Was it the 5th goal or the 6th goal, I think, when Shaw tries to clear it and then it deflects a couple of times and breaks to Salah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that takes a couple of deflections and ends up at the feet of Liverpool's best finisher. But at the same time, we often talk about in football, you create your own luck. You also create your own bad luck. And United have to come out of this game and realizing, yes, we did get some bad luck, but to be honest, we didn't deserve any good luck. because the way that we approached the last 20 minutes was so bad.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a mixture of the luck, but crucially underlying that is silliness or laziness or a mixture of the two.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that's where we didn't create any of our own luck. To be honest, we didn't deserve any of our own luck. We created our own bad luck because of how awfully we approached the end of that game. I mean, every single player had given up by that point. We just absolutely were not in the game one bit. And I think, you can look at some luck. If you play that game 50 times over, I don't think Liverpool will ever win 7-0 again. But that doesn't excuse everything that we saw from United, especially from some players that, we take as leaders that should have been the one pulling this team out of what was very clearly a tailspin and making sure that we shut that game down and didn't end up getting beat 7-0. To be honest, once it got to 4-0, I turned the game off because I just didn't. I expected United to kind of shut the game down, just take the sting out of it, take your beating and move on. And I didn't think that I would be able to learn anything useful about either team at the end from the last 20 minutes of that game.
Yeah.
I think what ended up...
The really bad lesson we did learn, and this was what was so disappointing, is I remember criticising Harry Maguire heavily, and I'm not going to take any of that criticism away. Anfield last April, I was working and sat in the press box, and for the last kind of 20, 30 minutes when it just kept getting worse, I watched United's captain, and there was just nothing there. To then see these players who we've built so much trust in, the relationship's great, and that will come back. I'm sure of that. I've got every faith in that. And the best way to start that would be by beating Real Betis, even if it's just 1-0 on Thursday. But the lack of leadership there, and these like Casemiro and Varane and Martinez, and Shaw's become a more senior player, and De Gea, but especially Casemiro, Martinez, Varane, there just wasn't. What it needed is for a bit of time wasting to take the kind of raucous gladiatorial atmosphere away from Anfield. And there were moments like that, even at 4-0 up, there were a couple of moments where it got a bit quiet. And when United attacked Liverpool fans, there was still kind of audible nerves in the ground. And I thought that was interesting. What it needed is a bit of that, but also someone to say at 4 or even 5-0, because there was plenty of time. There wasn't much time between goal 2 and 3, but between the rest, there was a fair bit of time. And to say, right, we just need to sharp shot here. We just need 2 banks of 4, maybe 4-5-1 or whatever. And the fact that none of those players, but also Ten Hag, who said afterwards that in the final 15 minutes, he just stood on the touchline and stared at his team. And afterwards, he was asked about it and said, I was analysing their body language and their communication to see what could be learned. Now, that's fine. And I love Erik Ten Hag. So I'm loath to criticise him, but that's not that fine, because for those final 15 minutes, how many goals do we concede in the final 15? Is it 2 or 3? I can't quite remember.
It was 3. It was
right.
4-0 at like 65 minutes.
So there's 3 goals in the final 15 minutes. So that isn't fine. Someone had to step in there and stop United playing in the way that they did. And no one did, because even at 6-0, we were just kind of charging up the pitch. And there was that combination of on the ball, we were just giving it away and charging up, trying to go and score a goal rather than being sensible about things. But also that laziness where Stefan Bajcetic gets past Bruno and he just kind of stands there. And that was disgraceful. And so that's a really negative lesson for the future. And I think, look, at 3 or 4-0, I think there has to be a recognition from United that you always want to go forward. You always want to try and get yourself back into the game. We were 3 or 4-0 down. Like, it wasn't going to happen at that point. Mm-hmm. And at a place like Anfield, we have enough experienced players on that pitch to know things can get out of hand. So this isn't a sort of comfortable thing to do, but you have to sort of shut the game down at that point. You have to just accept, you know what, the game is out of reach. We've played badly. We need to make sure we don't get embarrassed here. And I think that it was so naive from United, the way that we kept playing at the end of that game. And again, I keep going back to this. At 3 or 4-0, if we'd have walked out of that ground with a 4-0 defeat, of course, I would have been upset and disappointed. But I'd sort of dealt with it in the game. Like, I knew that in my heart of hearts, all of those goals had some element of really good play from Liverpool, some element of really bad play from United, and some amount of luck. And fine, you can deal with that. You write it off as a bad day at the office at Anfield where things can go wrong. But the way that we then absolutely just
we kept just doing ridiculous things throughout that last 20 or 30 minutes. And that is when the players completely gave up. And that's something I think that is so jarring to see as a football fan, because at this level, we have enough leaders on that pitch to not capitulate in the way that we did. The one that really stood out, what was the Darwin Núñez headed goal? Was that the 5th goal? I think it was the 5th, right?
6th. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the ball comes in from a corner for Liverpool. It goes out to Henderson at the back post.
That was Rashford, yeah.
Henderson's standing there for about 3 seconds before anyone goes to him. Rashford's looking around. He eventually then decides, oh, okay, I guess it's me that will have to go up there. He doesn't sprint out to Henderson. He sort of ambles over it. It's a joke of a child. And he's a player that you don't even really consider as one of the leaders of this United team, as someone that you expect that from. But come on.
Yeah, and the Salah.
A little bit of effort. You know, the players fully gave up at the end, and that was so disappointing to watch.
Sorry, that was the 5th goal. You were right. It read wrong on my page. Salah's 6th as well. Yeah. You had that. There's a terrible Shaw attempt at a clearance, but then Salah's free in the area, and McTominay's just standing behind him. And it's like, mate, and then Dalot trying to make a goal line clearance behind the line for the 7th. It's like, oh my Lord. Yeah, it was incredible. But
yeah, and I think Ten Hag has got off lightly here.
Yeah. 4-0, you come out. I tell you what's funny is 4-0, you come out and everyone will be criticising Ten Hag's tactics. 7-0, and everyone's criticising the players. So Ten Hag, I do think Ten Hag's got off a bit lightly because of how much we've all come to love him in the last few months. I don't think the way that game was managed, I'd blame the players for a lot of it, but I don't think the way that game was managed was good enough. And I didn't think that yesterday. I was very sympathetic towards him, but today, thinking about it, a lot less so. And I understood why he took Martinez off, because he was on a booking, but to throw Malacia and Sabitzer in there at 5-0 down is very harsh. And same with Elanga at 6-0. And to the fact that maybe I'm soft, but I give a little more leeway to the players who were at United last season. Maybe stupidly, but because in terms of the mental aspect of it, I can understand that if they were suddenly 3-0 down 50 minutes in at Anfield, it makes more sense that they would just completely crumble because they've been here before. It's like PTSD. So Shaw and even like Rashford and De Gea and whatever. But for the new ones like Martinez, Casemiro and Varane, Varane was injured for that game, I'm pretty sure, because it was Phil Jones played at Anfield last April. Yeah, you got to laugh at something.
And they did better than Martinez and Varane, 4-0 rather than 7.
Incredibly. Yeah. But for those new players, I am disappointed in them.
Well, yeah, because we've now got these players like Casemiro and Varane and Martinez that we've talked about so much in the last weeks and months, saying they're brilliant leaders. I even said before the cup final, didn't I? Before the League Cup final, I said, I can't see us having a performance where we properly don't show up for the whole game.
Did, yeah.
I mean, how stupid does that look now? It was hard to imagine these players that do seem to have such a such the right approach to the game from the mental standpoint, completely collapse in the way that they did towards the end of this game. It was completely baffling to watch. And like, again, that is what's the most disappointing part about this game, is that even in the worst time, we still didn't have the right attitude. Having said that, though, I don't want to pretend that it was all about that last 20 minutes. Like, that took it from a really bad loss to a hammering, but the tactics initially lost us that game in the first half as well. Yeah,
agreed. Right, let's talk a little bit about the tactics in a second, but first of all, guess the player clue before we get too deep inside this miserable episode.
Listen closely, there's quite a few names that are going to be thrown out in this one. So I have a strange history of playing for a lot of former Man United players. So I was both a teammate of Roy Keane and played under him as both manager and assistant manager at different clubs. I was then briefly played under Brian Robson during a loan spell, and I was also managed by Steve Bruce. So I can repeat that again. So I was a teammate of Roy Keane's and also played under him as both manager and assistant manager at 2 different clubs. I was then briefly, during a loan spell, playing under Brian Robson, and I also played under Steve Bruce during my career. Okay,
my initial thoughts: he played for Middlesbrough under Robson, and Roy Keane was assistant at Aston Villa, and Steve Bruce also managed Aston Villa. So they're the clubs in my head. Where Keane was manager, Sunderland or Ipswich or for Ireland. I have no names.
I'll tell you now, it wasn't
mind.
Ireland. It was a club team.
Okay. All right. So then I know the player played for one of Middlesbrough, Villa, Sunderland, and Ipswich, possibly all of them, and possibly someone else, which has hardly narrowed it down.
A lot to go on
a great
there.
extent. So I'm going to have to think that one over for a while. Right, the tactics. What was the main thing you thought Ten Hag got wrong? Because really, these are the lessons we know for the future are going to be more, or at least the lessons Ten Hag is going to take away for at least the rest of this season is going to be tactical. And just before you go, I think the lessons he'll take for the longer term, I do think there'll be decisions taken in the next year to 18 months to 2 years where we might look back at this game and think, oh, that's where he began thinking about that. Possibly related to players like Bruno Fernandes, Luke Shaw, David De Gea, and several others. But go on, tactically wise, what did you think was wrong?
So in the first half and the very start of the second, John McKenzie, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times recently, has done a really good video about this for Tifo Football on the same point I'm about to make. So go over there, watch that video. It's really good. I felt that the issue that we had was the same issue that we had in the first half against Barcelona, same issue that I've talked about before in the way that we press. And I'll go into more specifics in a second. In that, I think we are really aggressive on our press at times, but we don't actually execute it properly. So what United tend to do is when we want to press a team high up the pitch, our front three goes really, really narrow. We sort of have this plan to try and funnel the play into a small area of the pitch. We try and funnel teams into one side, generally using the touchline as like an extra defender. And we try and make sure that the game is played in a really compact area. So the idea being, instead of giving a team this, 100 yards by 50 yards whole pitch to play in, you force them to play in like a 10 by 20 yard box where every player inside that box is marked really tightly. There's no space to play in. The idea being, obviously, you make it hard for them to play out. You try and generate turnovers high up the pitch. Not a new concept. What United do is we're really, really big on trying to funnel play in one direction. So what will happen is if the ball goes out to, let's say, the right centre-back, the forward, the striker, who in this case is Rashford, will put that player on the ball under pressure, that right centre-back. The left winger, who in this case is Bruno Fernandes, will push onto the right back, and in this case is Alexander-Arnold, obviously. And then the winger on the opposite side of the pitch, who in this case was Anthony, will then come inside and stop the pass coming into the left centre-back. And then obviously the midfielders stay with their men, push forward. And so you try and make sure there is no easy ball in or out of that small kind of compact box. What United keep doing though, and this is a repeated problem now, is we leave the fullback on the other side of the pitch completely free in acres and acres of space. The idea, I think, is that you try and shut down the space in that little box so well that they can't make that pass out to the fullback on the other side. And you sort of take that risk. But we actually aren't good enough yet at stopping that. And so often what you'd find is Liverpool would have the ball, let's say, over in sort of the right back-ish kind of area, and there'd be an easy switch onto Robertson out on the left-hand side, and then Liverpool are away. Then we've got 5 or 6 players committed to that Liverpool sort of right back area, and now they're playing in loads and loads of space. I mentioned before that normally the way that great pressing teams overcome that is they jump with the fullback on the other side, who for us would be Dalot, get him to leave his winger, then the centre-backs come across to cover that winger, and Dalot would go on and jump onto Andy Robertson. This is exactly where Liverpool's first goal came from. We committed to the Liverpool sort of right-back area. I think it was Konate played a good switch out to Robertson. Dalot did push on to Robertson, but only after he received the ball. So he didn't make the first touch very difficult. He did engage with him. But then as a result of him doing that, Fred's then had to come across and play in right back. So you've got Dalot at centre mid, Fred as a right back. And then in fairness, it was good play from Liverpool. Gakpo's run from out to in, drew Fred wide, then the ball went inside of him. Varane is then sprinting to come across, can't get his body stopped in time. But it all comes from United's poor pressing in that right back area. And that was a constant theme throughout the game. Throughout the entire first half, Liverpool had so much joy.
And we didn't cause their fullbacks much of a problem. Partly because Bruno Fernandes was wide and Marcus Rashford was up front. Did you think that was a mistake? It's really weird talking about it now because of what came afterwards, but it did feel like maybe that was it worked okay in the first half, but you just thought United didn't really have that oomph. We had a couple of good moves, but without having that real
I've got to say, I don't really like Bruno Fernandes playing out wide in games like this. I think he's better out wide when we're playing against teams that are going to sit back, probably have quite a deep block, and where we're going to dominate possession, because that is where you need him in those areas. And we need quality. That is simply all you need, is to break down a team in a deep block. We aren't brilliant at creating loads of space. You just need quality balls coming into the box to beat those, 7 or 8 defenders from the other team that might be crowding the space in the penalty area. What I think the way that we approach these big games at the moment is we don't necessarily sit back. We try and soak up the pressure, and our main sort of attacking threat comes from transitional moments, right? It's how we've scored all of our goals, really, in all these big games throughout the season. That or set pieces. The problem with having Bruno Fernandes out wide is that when we do win the ball back, where does it normally drop? It normally drops into the centre of the pitch. And so that's when normally we're either able to play one pass into Bruno, or he's the one picking it up in the first place. And then he's able to play, these magical through balls into Rashford or Antony or Garnacho or whoever else. When he's out wide, we're stifling that sort of super skill, that super strength that he has, because he has maybe not more defensive duty, but he often has to track back further because the fullbacks get further forward than the defensive midfielders do that he would normally be tracking at number 10. But we're also meaning that in those transitional moments, he is just so much less of a force whenever we win the ball back. And when he's out wide, he doesn't have the pace himself to go and make those runs in behind and be the one on the end of those transitional balls, not least because there's no one else really in our team that can play them when he's out wide anyway. So I just think we're limiting Bruno Fernandes' main strength by putting him out wide in games that we are trying to play this more kind of transitional football. And it also limits Rashford because he now can't play in his best position off the left.
Yeah, we better move on. But I have an answer to your guess the player clue. But
wow, already
I know this is right. So I'm confident enough to say give the next clue so anyone who hasn't got it yet can have a stab at it, and then I'll tell you what I know the answer to be.
Okay, so the second clue is I won the FA Youth Cup in 2003, but I was never able to win the senior version, losing in the 2007 final, the first one at the new Wembley. You think you know who it is?
Yeah. All right, that's confirmed it for me.
Okay, and the player is?
Kieran Richardson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was on loan at West Brom under Brian Robson. I realised it couldn't be Robson at Middlesbrough, so then I pursued the Roy Keane line a bit more, which took me to Sunderland, where I know he signed all sorts of Man United players on loan or permanently. I knew Kieran Richard plays for Sunderland, and then also Aston Villa later on for a much shorter amount of time, and then I just had to match the Robson one, which was
and managed by Steve Bruce at Sunderland after Roy Keane as well.
Yeah, and the Steve Bruce one was less helpful because he could be at every club.
He's managed
in English football, whereas the Keane one was a little bit more limited and more useful. We're going to go into our picture today. We're going to talk.
This, I thought that Richardson might have also played under Solskjaer for Cardiff because he went there after Cardiff, after Villa.
Would he have played for England under Steve McLaren?
Oh, I don't know actually. All his England performances were 05 and 06, which I guess would have been under Ericsson still because McLaren took over after the 2006 World Cup. Well, I guess they could be if he played in 2006, after the World Cup, that would have been under Steve McLaren. But I don't know if any of his England appearances were then.
Yeah, maybe. Right, let's go into our Patreon Q&A. We've got some more interesting discussion about United Liverpool, if that interests you.
Football Social Daily.
On Football Social Daily this week, we've been speaking to Southampton legend Francis Bernali. In his 300-odd games as a player, Franny saw plenty, but this is something he didn't expect to see.
When I went over to get the ball thrown back, I just remember seeing something come back towards me, and I went to catch it thinking it was the ball, and it was one of the supporters throwing a raw chicken onto the side of the pitch, and I nearly caught it.
You can hear Franny's take on raw chickens, moustaches and more in our chat with him on Football Social Daily, available now wherever you get your podcasts.
Football Social Daily, the Premier League podcast.
Okay, coming out the Patreon Q&A, I didn't think there was much more to say about the United-Liverpool game, but we found plenty in it. That was a really interesting discussion about how United move on, and also what that result can do for Ten Hag. One of our patrons, Tony Rye, called it great ammunition to use to progress. So a nice conversation about that. And potential Real Betis away. Let's go into Academy Roundup, then loan players, and then United women. So we'll start with the under-21s didn't play. They play just after we record against Chelsea. It's against Chelsea, yeah, it is. The under-18s, though, had a thrilling game at Leeds, and Travis Binion, the league coach, was left reflecting on similar mistakes and familiar mistakes. Having beaten Derby last week 5-2, Binion was disappointed at the end of the game that United allowed Derby to score late on and then to get a penalty as well. It just changed the flow of the game from a completely dominant win to they kind of just they took their foot off the gas at 5-1, and the final half an hour of the game was all Derby, and he wasn't happy with that. It was similar. A 3-1 lead established over Leeds. That was established with a first half strike from James Nolan, which cancelled out an unfortunate early goal from Habib Ogoneye. And then United went in front with a clinical finish from Ethan Williams and a close range finish from Gabriel Biancheri, who's a new player signed for the under-16s. This was his debut, scored in his debut. Brilliant, all good so far. Travis says the game should be dead at 3-1. It absolutely should, but Leeds got back into it, scoring their second goal. Eli Harrison was under pressure and gave the ball away, the goalkeeper. As Travis Binion said himself, it's a ridiculous goal, and he has to learn from that. The goal breathed life back into Leeds. Harrison's a really talented goalkeeper, and there's real high hopes for him. He's been really good with the ball at his feet this season. His shot-stopping quality is obvious. He's saved a couple of penalties in the last few weeks, but these are very useful. This is his second mistake in a few weeks, and it's a really useful period where he really needs to push himself and make sure he doesn't make them again. And then United conceded a header late on to draw 3-3. So a disappointing result, but the under-18s group is doing really well at the moment. They're so young. The number of under-16s and under-15s in the squad is growing every week. It's a ridiculously young team, and they're getting proper fast-tracked learning, and it's going well. The under-21s, as I said, play Chelsea on Monday night. Amari Forson has been nominated for February's Premier League 2 Player of the Month after 4 goals and 1 assist in February. Jack, what's the main loan headlines?
Well, the player that's generally been making the loan headlines, Amad Diallo, had a similarly awful weekend to the first team, to be honest. He played full 90 minutes but lost 5-1 for Sunderland against Stoke. The Stoke manager, Alex Neil, is a former Sunderland manager, so a bit of revenge for him there. Hannibal also had a quiet afternoon for Birmingham. He played just the final 20 minutes against Wigan. But it was a much better day for Alvaro Fernandez. He played the full 90 minutes for Preston. They drew with Watford. Fernandez has had a little run in the team again. We've been mentioning how he's sort of been competing with Robbie Brady for that left wing-back spot. Robbie Brady was sent off last week and has now served 2 games, I think, of that ban. So Fernandez has been getting some good opportunities and made the most of them, was getting a lot of praise in the media after the game, which actually got picked up by the United website as well. So really good sort of week for him. Then we got Charlie Savage as probably the biggest story in terms of good play. He played all 90 minutes for Forest Green. Forest Green continued to struggle with their form, but Charlie Savage won February Player of the Month for the club that was just handed out recently.
Also in the Championship, on loan manager Michael Carrick with another thumping win for Middlesbrough, 5-0, and Middlesbrough third in the league.
And then the other loan news, Charlie McNeil actually played against Ethan Galbraith. For Charlie McNeil playing for Newport, Ethan Galbraith playing for Salford City. Galbraith and Salford City ended up coming out winners. They beat Newport 3-1. Charlie McNeil has had some decent opportunities actually recently, but hasn't managed to get a goal yet for Newport. He's struggled a little bit down there. So hopefully he can get a little bit of an improvement in the next few weeks. And then Shola Shoretire also played 65 minutes for Bolton as well.
Lovely. United women, as I mentioned much earlier, entirely contrasting result to the men. 5-1 winners over Leicester City, who have become a much improved team under Willie Kirk recently, despite their status at the bottom of the table. United, of course, should have won this game, and they did. So that's that. Well, not quite. There's a bit more to say. Alessia Russo scoring a hat-trick for starters. 2 in the first half, another just after Leicester got one back 5 minutes into the second half. Russo then assisted Leah Goldton's strike after that, before the pair came off for Rachel Williams and Lucia Garcia, who scored United's 5th goal. Good performance, very positive day, no doubt about that. I think I mentioned it last week, but just in case, and it's worth saying again anyway, on Mary Earps, this was her first game after being named the best goalkeeper in the world at the Best Awards. And if you haven't watched her speech yet, it's brilliant. Honest and inspiring at the end. It's on my Twitter feed if you want to see it and find it easily. It's all over Twitter as well. But crucially, as I also mentioned in our last episode, United were playing this weekend. Chelsea and Arsenal were not. They met in the Conti Cup final at Wembley. Arsenal won that. But what that meant for United is this was an opportunity to stretch the lead at the top of the table, and they have done exactly that. United now have 35 points from 14 games. City have 32 from 14. Chelsea in third have 31 points from 12 games, 2 fewer than United. And having played the same number as Chelsea, 12, Arsenal have 5 fewer points than them. And how many fewer than United? 9 points fewer than United. So as things stand, the title favourites are Chelsea still. If they win their games in hand, they'll go ahead of United. But we have a brilliant opportunity here, and it's going to be really exciting. And to make it even better, United and Chelsea play each other next week on Sunday at 12:30. United away from home. It's going to be really hard. The game's on BBC Two. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't expect much. I think Chelsea will win. United have never beaten Chelsea, but a draw would be great, and it would really shift the scales. So it's exciting. Jack, Thursday night, Real Betis. In our Patreon Q&A, we spoke about it a little bit, but Marek Garbowski asked, how do you move on from this, from such a dreadful performance? And the simple answer we gave was, well, you win on Thursday, and that's the absolute crucial thing. We also spoke about what changes Ten Hag might make, and possibly even to the captaincy and that. So if you want to hear that, become a patron and you can get access to this one and every other bonus Q&A for all of the past and all of the future as well, for as little as £1.50 a month. But in terms of Real Betis, they're going to sit back. United need to come out very strongly, but we know what these Spanish opposition can do, and it's going to be a really difficult game.
Yeah, United need to come out and start fast. I think that is the order of the day, really. Old Trafford is going to be behind the team, definitely, but I think there will be an element of angst around the stadium. I think if United come out and it's really flat, especially if we go a goal down early, I think you could see an atmosphere that isn't the best for the players to be in. So I think it's come out fast, start quickly, and as long as we do that, the fans will be completely on side. Shouldn't be too much trouble. It's still going to be a difficult game because Betis are a good side, but we don't need to make things more difficult for ourselves by starting slowly. Yeah,
it's amazing. When I was at the West Ham game, I think it would have been shown on TV as well, but there was just a procession of awards and ceremonies for Mary Earps, for Casemiro, for David De Gea, and the League Cup was brought out by Bruno and Harry Maguire. And our next home game is going to be very different at the start of it, having come in off the back of a 7-0 defeat. It's such a strange contrast and such a surprising thing to have. But yeah, it's about restoring a bit of that faith.
Yeah, look, I think we can look to the previous Liverpool game at home earlier in the season as a bit of a model here.
Yeah, that's very true.
We were coming off the back of 2 really bad defeats. All right, playing against a much bigger rival, obviously, in Liverpool than Betis, but we came out, Dalot smashed into, I think it was Luis Diaz on the right-hand side within 20 seconds. Martinez then smashes through the back of Salah and sort of gives him a bit of a shoulder charge as he's walking away from the challenge.
Yeah.
Those things obviously don't win us that game, but it sets the tone and it gets the crowd fully on side for the entire game in a stadium that's probably going to be quite anxious. I think there will be an amount of defiance inside Old Trafford, as there should be within the players as well. But I think that is going to be a stadium that could not turn, but could just not be a very conducive atmosphere for our players to perform at their best. They have to set that standard and set the table right at the beginning of that game.
Yeah. Betis are a really good team, though. They were the best performing team in the group stages. In the Europa League group stages, they are playing well in La Liga. We say they're going to sit back because that is what I expect them to do, but they are quite an attacking side normally, and I'm sure they'll be looking to break very quickly. And if they can pen United back, but otherwise just keep us out and take us home. And I think if they can get a draw, they'll be really confident of beating United at home. Incredibly, I don't think they've ever got further than this stage. I think they've got to this stage quite a few times, but they've never got further than this stage. So it's very interesting for them. There is a link this is the first time we're playing Real Betis in a competitive match. We obviously played them and lost in the mid-season break, but this is our first competitive match against them, which reunites two clubs of Patrick O'Connell, who was the only manager to guide Real Betis to La Liga in the 1930s and played for Manchester United. I believe was United's first officially Irish player, not Northern Irish, but Republic of Ireland player back in 1908 or 1909. Played a few times. Sorry, no, it wasn't. It was in 1914. It was just before the war. He captained United for a season, played at centre half, and then went on to manage Real Betis and Barcelona and Seville and several other clubs as well. Really, he's a fascinating character. If you want to read more about him, look his name up, Patrick O'Connell, who was known as Don Patricio in Spain, obviously. So that's a nice little note to end on. United was shit in 1914, and it's not as bad as that now. Prediction for the game?
I think it's going to be tight and quite scrappy, as it normally is against Spanish teams in the knockouts. I'll go for a 1-1 draw. I think it'll be a draw, either 0-0 or 1-1, but I'll go for 1-1. It's hard.
It's obviously really hard to be optimistic right now. I'm going to go for 2-1 United win.
Wow. All right. Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Let's keep a smile on our faces to end. Right. Thank you very much for listening. I honestly can't believe if you are listening to this and you've got to the end, but I hope you can move on now, have a listen to this and enjoy whatever day of the week it is. And United will be back on Thursday in a hopefully very different fashion. I'm sure there will be a good response on Thursday. Whether we win the game or not, I don't know, but I'm sure there'll be a good response. I have every faith in these players, and especially in our magnificent bald man, Erik ten Hag. So thank you for listening, everyone, and we'll speak to you very soon. Goodbye.
Podcast Network.